Hello, this is Alex Birkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. This is an episode of our Kitchen Side series where we show you the behind the curtain at our own agency, Omniscient Digital. In this episode, my co-founder Allie and I are going to discuss hiring, managing, and communicating with freelance writers. Now, obviously, we do this a lot for our agency work, but our various experiences expand that in a few ways as well. First, Allie was also previously a freelance writer full-time. And second, I've hired and worked with freelance writers for in-house roles, as well as very recently for my personal blog. So in this episode, we're going to discuss how to find and vet freelancers, how to onboard them and communicate your expectations and style guidelines, how to pay them, and some potential pros and cons of working with freelancers in general. Without further ado, here's our kitchen side discussion on the Long Game Podcast.
So we're here filming another episode of Kitchen Side, and we're talking about finding, vetting, and hiring freelance writers. This is going to be talked about with Allie, who is head of content at Omniscient, and then co-founder Alex Birkett. So first, let's talk about how and why having freelancers can help ramp up content production. How does that work?
Yeah, I can take this. Off the top of my head, I think that hiring freelancers can help with content production for just endless reasons, but my favorite ones are to be able to increase production cadence, so get more out faster without having to personally churn. I like that working with a variety of people can bring in all kinds of experiences, points of view. You can make sure to feature people with different experience levels and different creative ideas of how to either approach a topic, approach a keyword, or maybe feature your product or your brand in that piece. And then personally, I like it because I can focus on other things. I don't always have to be writing all the time, even though that is what I love. It can get tiring when you have just a wealth of other responsibilities.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. What about you, Alex?
I'll echo the same things essentially, and give examples. When I was at CXL, I hired freelancers, not because I needed the extra resources, although that did help too, because then I could write fewer pieces and I could go update older content or do other parts of my job, like experimentation. But I like that part because I could get experts in their given niches. Yeah. So I could get freelancers who focused on e-commerce, on analytics, on, their specific field. So I wouldn't have to dive deeply into every single area. And I would get unique, diverse, interesting thought pieces. But more so, I think the more important thing is just the resource constraints and ramping up your content production. Every company is going to have to deal with that no matter what size, whether it's Intercom, HubSpot, Unbounce level, or whether it's a small startup or even a solo blog. In fact, I'm going through this right now because I run an agency, a content agency, and have a job. And I'm also trying to write content for my own personal website, which gets decent traffic and has been a huge leverage for me. But I just don't have the time that I want to spend writing for my own site. If I had more time, potentially I would just do it all myself. And I'm still going to write an article or so a month myself. But at a certain point, I'm I got to hire some freelancers for this. If I want to actually make this into something, if I want to build a traffic base, if I want to bring visitors to the site, I have to hire freelancers. So I basically did it out of the necessity of simply not having the resources myself or the time myself.
Yeah. So would you say that that's one of the the pros of having freelancers versus having them in-house would be getting varied types of writers, in all different kinds of styles? Would that be one good thing about having a freelancer?
Yeah, I definitely think freelance writers specifically, you can tap on a bunch of different types of knowledge and experience levels without having to hire all of them, especially for teams with smaller budgets, or maybe their content projects are I don't want to say temporary, but they're just a short-term project versus a long-term play. Yeah. It may make sense to bring on a bunch of freelancers instead of hiring a bunch of people. I also think that just depending on the content type project, freelancers can be better at it than you can, and that's okay. In my job right now, I have a limited scope of knowledge on the subject matter that we're writing about, but I don't want that to hold back the entire progress of our content marketing. So instead of me taking the time to try to basically learn something new, I can flex my content marketing knowledge and hire folks who have that knowledge to contribute pieces that, tap into our audience and connect with our target readers. So I think that, that's definitely a pro of working with freelancers is you have a lot of flexibility, a lot of folks to tap on depending on what you need and if you can do it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. What would be a con of that, of having a freelancer versus having someone in-house?
Speaking from experience when I was freelancing and with the agency now, freelancers don't always have a direct line to your product and your product growth, like roadmap and your overall strategy and just how your whole company works together. So, and I know we're going to talk about this later on, but without a thorough content brief or very well fleshed out deliverables, like freelancers are working kind of in like a silo and it's your job to like build that bridge. Right. So over time, I think with a very technical product or like a super long-term content play, you kind of have to treat your freelancer somewhat as in-house, like have a very extensive onboarding process and very thorough content briefs, or they're just not going to be able to produce at the same
quality.
I don't want to say quality. I'm thinking more of just like knowledge of the product and just how, or like your target audience, just all the things that go into your company and your roadmap. I think that's the only con, but it can be fixed if you can like maybe over communicate and create those like knowledge bridges. That's one way to kind of counter that.
For sure. Anything to add, Alex?
Yeah, I think freelancers are probably less reliable overall. Reliable maybe is not the right word, but you could theoretically leave a company without saying anything if you were an in-house employee. It doesn't happen that often. Usually you put in 2 weeks, you help the person transition. And usually you're going to stay for at least a year or more if you like the job. Not always the case. But with a freelancer, you don't really have those same obligations. I guess you could do a contract. You could, stretch it out to like a 6-month kind of retainer or something like that. But generally speaking, they have a lot more flexibility and you have a lot more flexibility. So that's both a pro and a con, depending on like what you're going for.
Right.
So that's the kind of the point on the pro side where like you have a lot more flexibility. You can get 10 different writers in, you can pick and choose who you want to work with for which projects. You can't do that with in-house employees that easily. It's a longer term investment. So it's kind of like for every pro, there is a con. I think that probably freelancers are more expensive. All in.
Because you have that
like
flexibility
a good freelancer.
where they're not committed all the time. So you're buying for that flexibility.
I think you're going to get more out of a full-time writer if they're in-house. Like you're just like on a per article basis. Allie, when you've been in-house, you've probably produced more value than you got paid for. But but on a freelance basis, like you can charge rates commensurate with the value that you're adding. And I think it's just, if you're a good high quality freelance writer, you're probably going to get paid more.
Before we move on, to tap on that question or the comment about the reliability in terms of like commitment levels, I would definitely say obviously in-house, you just are more tightly tethered to your team. But in terms of like quality of content, I would actually argue, from being on both sides of the coin, I would actually argue that like freelancers, if they're like well fleshed out, like, hiring, vetting, all that, I know we'll get to that. The quality freelancers, I believe, are better reliable for quality because like, I think we talked about this in another conversation, but like what they write is what they're known for. And that's how they get their next job. And that's how they earn new business.
They're more likely to go after freelance gigs versus an in-house position, maybe, because they can write for different.
Well, I'm just saying like what they write has a direct line to their future work. So like they're not going to skimp on quality because they know that can specifically determine who they work for in the future and like how much they can charge or how much they continue to charge. In-house writers, while they are reliable in terms of like showing up, I think that they're in, like they've got the job and they know they're going to be producing on a pretty, I would say, frequent level. So I think the quality reliability there is is more likely to suffer than for like an ad hoc freelancer.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
They're trying to eat what they have to eat.
That's what you said. I was trying to remember the way you like phrased it.
Yeah, they're always trying to win the next job for not just like other clients, but for you too, because you could fire a freelancer at any moment. So it's like if they produce 2 or 3 bad articles in a row, you're like, well, that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you're always kind of on the line.
I think there's a stronger safety net for in-house writers, and some people might take advantage of that. I don't want to say like this is not a blanket statement. I'm just saying like I've been on both sides. I've seen both kinds of writers. In-house writers, sometimes they just produce the bare minimum or just a little bit above that.
Right.
On the flip side to that, though, you mentioned this a little bit with regards to the kind of communication between the marketing manager and the writer. If there's misalignment, I think you can have a lot more trouble with freelancers just because you're always in that like honeymoon stage. You're always in like the first phase of the relationships. You don't quite understand how to communicate to the writer, what they say when they mean they're going to get it in on Friday or whatever. Like you don't know kind of their timetables and how they interact. And you don't know their quality. So it's very difficult over the first couple assignments. And you can mitigate a lot of that if you have really good practices like editorial calendars, content briefs. If you use tools like ClearScope and stuff, that makes it pretty homogenized in terms of like writing publication and like standards. But it's like the quote we always use, like play long-term games with long-term people.
Yeah.
You build out a compound interest if you work in-house for a long time. And that knowledge that compounds as you work in-house, that's hard to get if you're just a freelancer coming in with many different clients. Like towards the end of the time at CXL, I knew I didn't need to do keyword research. I knew what topics were going to be popular. I knew how to write them. I knew who to reach out. That was all knowledge that was just kind of like back of hand. I just accumulated that. And if somebody comes in, that takes a long time to build that up. So I think that's also kind of a trade-off.
Right. Yeah. So how do you bridge the knowledge gap between your business and your freelancers just to make sure that the content is fluid?
Well, the first thing that I've done, and I've learned my lesson on this, is I think that you should spend nearly as much time as you would hiring an in-house writer, hiring a freelancer. So a pretty big like application window, lots of distribution, lots of, vetting, conversations, definitely paid test pieces. Because I think that would just weed out the folks who are either not interested, they're a bad fit. Now, I don't know if people always had the time to do that, depending on what project they're hiring for at the agency. That's what I like to do because I think it saves time and energy down the line. And I did that for our blog. I think it really paid off for bringing someone on who would work with us for a long time. But let's say that's already done and they're in. Extensive onboarding deck. We have it on the website as an offer. Explaining everything about your business, everything from like brand guidelines to competitors to what we consider to be our top content, what we consider to be our competitors' top content, like lots of examples, lots of things for them to reference and read. A live conversation. Nowadays, just like a Zoom call, 15 minutes to connect. I think it's easier to at least set the groundwork over a video call versus just a bunch of emails. Moving forward, it could be asynchronous, but I think to set the stage. And then content briefs. I've also written a long blog post on this and we have an offer on it too, but really, really thorough content briefs. It takes a lot of work up front. I know Alex just did a bunch for his blog and I'm sure it took him some time, but in my opinion, you get those done and that's all you have to send them. And they'd be like, okay, good, got it. I'll see you in a week kind of thing. And to me, like all that upfront work is very worth it for kind of a seamless production cadence down the line.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about our process here at Omniscient and touch on, you wrote a blog about this, Allie. You can check it out on our website, but basically you narrowed it down to 6 steps. So first, getting your shit together, right? Gathering info on your brand guidelines, content strategy. Anything else you want to add there?
I guess thinking about it in terms of when we brought someone on for our own blog, I wanted to have, all of our most of our strategy done certain deliverables, like why we were doing this, the things that the three of us as partners could tackle. So I knew I could set that stuff aside and focus on what would be appropriate for our writer. I would say that was the most important thing for me. And then thinking it in the context of people who might be listening, everything from like brand guidelines, depending on how important that is to you, pulling together kind of like what I said for that onboarding deck. I wrote that blog post through the lens of what information someone might need to build a really good onboarding deck for a freelancer. And that's just some of the content I thought of. So competitors, content you're really proud of on your site that you essentially would like to duplicate, any important product features, benefits, offers, things like that should be reflected in the content. I think that stuff is just good to have. And it also helps your team kind of get their shit together so that you're all aligned before you bring in someone externally.
Sure.
So at least you know, and funny enough, like when I was building our information, I noticed what was missing. And it was nice to have that kind of have noticed that before I came in, and I was like, oh, sorry, I need to fix this really quick before you can get started. So it's kind of like a checks and balances thing before you bring someone in who's expecting you to have everything together.
Yeah, for sure. So the next step would be defining your content types and topics. So what do you need written? Is it an ebook? Is it a case study? Why is that important?
Well, Alex, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that I probably index a little bit less heavily on having all those resources. I'm probably a little more, I heard this term today. I joined a writer's accountability group, and in writing fiction, there's a plotter and a pantser. Have you heard this before?
Mm-hmm. What is it?
A plotter is somebody who writes the plot out entirely and they're very meticulous, like beforehand. And a pantser is somebody who flies by the seat of their pants.
Oh, you're definitely the latter.
So I'm a pantser.
Yes, you are.
But the materials that I always have in place for freelance writers or guest writers is an editorial guide or principles or some sort of like statement that says, here's who we write for, here's how we write, and here's kind of like the exclusions. Here's what we don't do. I did that at CXL. I did that for my personal site. We did that for Omniscient. It just shows like, hey, this isn't going to be like a bullshit dumping ground for your bad content. Like this is, we have standards.
Right.
So I don't do a style guide ever. I don't. That's where Allie and I are probably like on diametric opposite ends. Is like I don't care where they, if they use passive voice or active voice.
Oh my gosh!
If it sounds good, that's it. I don't care. So if I can read it, that's fine. There's certain things that I don't like. I don't like when somebody does like a 6-paragraph introduction. So I always add to my principles like cut to the chase. Like, don't tell me what you're going to say, just say it. So little things like that. But actually, so all of this goes to say, there's a hack when you're hiring freelance writers. Write like that in the job description. So I did that on my ProBlogger ad a couple weeks ago. I put it out for my personal site, and I didn't even try to do this. I just wrote it really informally because I, frankly, didn't have a lot of time. It was like 20 minutes, and I'm like, it's pure stream of conscious, like my voice, a couple swear words. And then I had like all of the criteria by which I kind of filter for detail orientation. I always put like a quote brown M&Ms clause where it's like Van Halen used to say that they don't want any brown M&Ms in their dressing room. And if they find them, then they can void the contract at the cost of the promoter. So I like little items like that where it's like use this exact subject line or say your favorite album of all time in the email. And anybody who doesn't follow those instructions, I just throw them out because I can't follow, those like clear prompts.
Right.
But other than that, I just wrote this like very informal in my voice thing. And not only, so I got really good content from it. Like the writers who wrote some articles, some test articles wrote in that style, which is amazing. But I just got really funny email responses. They're like, wow, I really resonated with like your voice here. It didn't sound like corporate and like jargony and blah, blah, blah.
Well, you're essentially attracting a certain kind of person.
Yes, exactly. By putting myself out there like that, I attract similar people who want to write in that style. And I think you can do that implicitly. So I think you can attract like good writers for your brand without like doing all of the, like having the artifacts is great, but I think you can do it in all the manners in which you communicate too.
Interesting. Cool. I like it. I'm still thinking about the plotter and the pantser.
I love that term. That really, sums up a lot for me.
So let's go back to content types and topics. Why is it important to relay what you need written? Is it making sure that maybe that's their niche?
Yeah, I mean, figuring out what you need is definitely going to dictate who you look for. I mean, if you have an ebook project or a white paper or blog posts or like an original research report, it might change who you look for and like how you do your research on someone, or maybe how you ask for recommendations. I don't think that someone can write all of those things very well.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
I just, there's different purposes and different formats. And I think, there's great writers out there, but there are specialists. And if you're going to outsource, I would definitely recommend outsourcing someone who could do something better than you. And same with the topics. I mean, you have someone you need to write an ebook about like cannabis, or blog posts about like email marketing. I mean, that's definitely going to dictate how you write your job ad or how you like look for that writer. So again, it's just making sure you have all your ducks in a row beforehand. Sure. Hopefully, Alex, you did that before you looked for writers.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think it's not just a delineation between ebooks and content formats, but also I don't know what you'd call this, but like types of content itself. Yeah. So you can delineate different types of blog posts. So on my blog, I'm going to be writing these they're like product listicles, like reviews of like the top 10 like best affiliate marketing software or whatever. And then there's kind of comparison pages. So like MailChimp versus like MailerLite, that's a content format. There's technical writing, which I like to do, frankly, like where it's like a lot of screenshots and like call outs and, like arrows and stuff like that. And you're not writing as much as you are like showing how to do a process. So that's like another style that people I think can specialize in. There's thought leadership. So I think like you want a good writer in whatever field that is. Right. Like for me, like I'm right now I'm trying to get better. I'm actively trying to train myself to become a better like essayist or like thought leadership writer. Cause that's not my background is more of the technical stuff. Yeah. So if I were, I don't know, smarter, I would probably hire somebody to just do that stuff. But yeah, I think you can basically hire based on that.
Yeah, you can niche down in many different ways, right?
Yeah, because I think there's more difference between that than there is like an ebook and a long form article. I think some long form articles could literally just be like designed and probably, put behind a gated lead magnet and just turn into an ebook and nobody would notice,
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting point. Okay. What about creating your onboarding flow? So like you were mentioning earlier, so slides with everything they need to know, sharing your content calendar. Why is all of that important?
I mean, I think it's that same idea of just front loading a lot of the communication. I mean, when I was a freelancer, I didn't want to hop on a call. I didn't want a one-on-one with my clients every week. And really starting the relationship on a very informational note, even if it might be more than what the freelancer needs in the moment, at least you pulled all of it together in a single place, like the onboarding deck that we have on our site. I mean, everything from legal stuff to how they can invoice and get paid. And this also kind of trims questions that back and forth that might happen after their first piece or as they're getting to the end of the first assignment. Like you can proactively answer all those questions. And I think providing all the information, like I said, from style guide to personas to subject matter experts. I mean, if you have all that together and that's something that you want to provide, it's, I think, better just to have it all up front in a single place. So, and you get to meet them and chat with them and get to know them if you want to build that camaraderie, like they are an in-house person that's there. If not, all it does is serve just to provide a bunch of information and send them off.
Right. So. Cool.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, Allie is way better at that than I've ever been. But the one minimum that I would always do is I would put them on the same workflow that other writers were on. Yeah. And I think that's more maybe of a content operations thing. Once you're dealing with enough freelance writers and enough in-house writers and enough guest writers, is there's just a million topics flying in every which direction. So like not crossing hairs and not like duplicating efforts and basically having the visibility for everybody on the board, I think is important. And especially for you as the editor, the content marketing manager, that's crucial. So I've always done that. The onboarding packets, maybe less so. Like I usually get on for like a call, like a one-on-one call. I know it's probably not, desired all the time, but like at least to like intro and, explain what I'm trying to do and all that
one-on-ones.
stuff.
I meant
Oh
like
yeah,
weekly
fuck that.
ones. Yeah, no. But no, I mean, getting someone aligned with like the broader workflow is definitely part of the onboarding deck. You know, what tool do we use? How can here, let me add you to this really quick. Like, how do you use the tool? Like, what do we expect for like editing timelines, and here, how many days we have for revisions, like things like that. If that's an important part of your workflow, if you've got a lot of, like Alex said, like things just flying around.
Right. So
our onboarding deck has places for all of that information if that's something that you want to share.
Cool. So then let's talk about starting your freelance search. So what are some ways to find people? Referrals, Reddit?
Yeah, referral is my favorite. I have personally built like a pretty extensive network of either writers or people who work with them. So that's my personal go-to, just because I always trust my network's recommendations. And it's usually like, hey, we've worked with this person before. Here's some of their work they produce. Like, we would highly recommend them. After that, like, sometimes, especially with the case of my latest role where I kind of lack that technical knowledge, I actually found the guy that I'm working with on Medium because I was reading some of his stuff to try to learn myself. So, and this is kind of like a way that I didn't realize, I don't know why, but like just kind of looking at who bylines your favorite content, or content that when you're reading it, you're like, wow, this is really good. I want this on my site. Reach out to them. I mean, maybe they will write, maybe not. This guy had never freelance written before, and I kind of suggested it. We talked about terms, and that was that. But I knew he had the knowledge and the passion for the topic because I was learning from him, you know, right there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's smart.
Otherwise, you know, I'm part of some freelance Facebook groups. Twitter is always a good thing to tap on if you have a well kind of fleshed out network. In the article, I recommend doing a Google search. That can go either way. If you know enough about like what type of content you want, like Alex said, a listicle or something, if you know what topic you want to write about, maybe you can kind of hone the search in that way. Because I think if you search freelance writer, you will just get so much different stuff.
Yeah. How do you use Twitter? I'm curious.
How do I use Twitter?
Yeah, like to find a freelancer.
Honestly, given the place I'm personally at on Twitter, I usually just tweet like, does anybody know a freelance writer who writes about X or who specializes in X?
That's if you have a following that could support.
Yeah.
You could use advanced search, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Keywords. I guess I don't know if that would filter for like freelance writers or more so just people talking about that topic.
I would say the first course of action, if you've never hired a freelancer, is definitely ask people who you admire or whose content you admire. Secondly, do some digging for content that you'd like to eventually write for yourself and see who bylined it. After that, maybe social media. It's not supposed to be an easy process.
Yeah.
If it's easy, you probably aren't finding the right writer.
That's where the vetting comes in.
Now, that's at the start. I think over time it will be easier as you build your network. I'm not saying it's always going to be hard, but it takes a little bit of time to find those good ones.
I think it should be, it's not easy, but it should be fun.
Yeah.
Like, it is fun
well,
finding these diamonds in the rough.
Curse words in there, you know?
Yes, exactly. So ProBlogger is a great job board for writers. I highly recommend trying to source people. If you don't have those other sources, what you want at the core is somebody who you can see their work. You can see their past, like the proof that they can write about the topic that you're wanting them to write about. Mm-hmm. So that's where like referrals come in, especially if it's like a warm contact, somebody you both trust. Like that's something you're appealing to the authority and the respect and the trust of that person. So it's a credible referral. ProBlogger, if they have like links to stuff written on the topic, like I always prioritize those. Another way I like to do this is going on places that are sort of passion. I don't know how to describe this, like forums and review sites and whatever. And people aren't paid to write, but they spend a lot of time there writing these like really in-depth posts. So Quora, I found really, really good writers on Quora.
Yeah.
Back at CXL, anybody writing like long form stuff about A/B testing and statistics, they're a good freelance writer. Or Slack groups or Facebook groups. There's a couple of guys I know, like every day I see like these mile-long Facebook comments on like these really technical questions. I'm like, you should turn that into a blog post. That's amazing.
You're on Facebook.
So any like communities where there's like kind of passionate people in that subject area, they may not be like polished writers, but that's why, you know, you're an editor or you have an editor. Like that's the purpose. So I love those places.
That's a great idea. Cool. All right. Next is interviewing your shortlist. So what questions to ask, like what your niche is, or asking for publication samples.
Yeah, I would say like as you do your research to create a short list of like name, website, any niche or specialty that you can kind of deduce from your research. And then I say before you reach out for an interview, kind of do research on their website, review their portfolio. If they have their rates, I mean, that could be a way that they're either a good fit or they're not. Some people don't post their rates. But it's your responsibility to figure that stuff out before you contact them.
Yeah. How do you find out what a standard rate is? Because that's not like
it's impossible. It depends on the industry and the writer and the quality. The variance is way higher than I expected.
Yeah, it's tough. I would say that's why I think in the whole part one, get your shit together. Like you have to know your budget, at least have a starting point that you can start the conversation with. And so you don't kind of leave it up to, I don't want to say you leave it up to the writer, but like if you know what you have to work with, especially if you're like not the department head or you don't have free reign of your budget, like you need to know what you can work with before you start talking to folks, because especially if their numbers are published and then you're like, oh, I can't do that. They're probably like, why did you reach out to me?
Right.
I would say that's probably one of the most important things in the pre-interview or like the first interview step is like getting their rates because you don't want to waste their time. I actually think negotiating for rates is stupid because like if you get a better rate than they usually give, they're just going to feel resentful about that. Like they'll get a better client and you're going to be like, degraded to like the back burner client. So I'm not a huge fan of like saying like, oh, like you're usually $700 an article. Can we get that down to 500? No, like I usually just pay what they want and like make sure that I have my bands and my budget in place and I'm only filtering for the people in that band. Like if they're too low, it's like, maybe I don't trust the quality. I don't know. Maybe
what if they aim high knowing you might negotiate?
That's why I think it's worth maybe one question back because they can always say no. Like when I was a freelancer, I always overshot knowing they would counter. And the folks that didn't, I was like, woohoo, I just got way more than I thought I would. And then if they did, we kind of landed where I wanted to be. So quality is like my top thing for all of our client work and our blog work. Not that it isn't otherwise, but especially for our client work, given the frequency of posts that come through and that I have to work with, like it's very important to me to know that they are near perfect right off the bat. And so for me, like I know that usually means a higher priced freelance writer, especially someone that has that subject matter expertise. So, I mean, I always try to negotiate just once, and I never want it to be like oh, that's dumb. Why you charge that much? Like I don't believe that. I believe that, you should charge whatever you want, but I'll usually negotiate with, hey, we have X amount per month. Like, do you have like a bulk fee, or would you give me a discount per piece if I can promise you this many pieces? And usually folks are willing to. So I would say like one level of negotiation, possibly. If you are very adamant about that writer and their knowledge, it might be worth it.
Yeah, I think I maybe misphrased that or spoke too strongly. I'll negotiate in terms of packages and like in at the margins. Yeah. But I'm saying like if you know that you can't afford $1,000 for an article, you should make that clear up front. And like if it's going to be like in the range of like $400 to $600, and that's like what you have in your mind, that should be out on the table. And like they should also put their kind of rates on the table. Otherwise, I think it's a waste of time. Sure. So I think like that's pre-interview material. I think you want to see that they've published stuff in that niche and they can actually write about it. So I love having like 3 pieces of content that you've published. It could be a ghostwritten thing, right? It could be something that I don't like when they send Google Docs that haven't been published, because it's like, why isn't that published kind of thing? Yeah. I like to do my brown M&Ms clause. What else is a filtering mechanism on the application / pre-interview?
Yeah, like what are some red flags to look out for in someone? Just not having anything, like you said, the Google Doc, or
I would say calling themselves like a content writer, or like I can write about anything, or
that's a big one.
That's not a lot of.
I've had applicants who their only content they've written about and published is in like a completely different niche. it'll be about gardening, and they're like, I'm writing about like A/B testing and stuff. It's like pretty like technical. Like you need to know what you're talking about. And they're like, no, I can learn anything. I can write about anything. And it's like, no, that's a clear no.
Yeah, I actually wrote a personal piece on this, like being a good writer doesn't make you a good writer. And I've learned that from experience. Like I consider myself a good writer, but there are more topics than not that I would just avoid because like it doesn't matter if you can write beautiful sentences. Like if you don't know what you're talking about, if you can't relate to the reader, if you can't show that you have like authority either on your own behalf or on behalf of the brand that you're writing for, like you're not a good fit. And that's okay. Like there's so much to write about these days. You don't have to like fit in everything.
No.
Crap, I had something I was going to say and then I forgot. Oh, going back to pre-interview stuff. If you can't find a writer's rates off the bat, some folks do publish them, some folks don't. If you're reaching out for an initial conversation, include your budget in that message because they can weed you out. You know, like let them realize like, oh, they won't pay what I want. And then they either will say that or they won't get back to you and bam, like save time. I wouldn't wait till the last part of the conversation to like, oh, by the way, here's my budget. Because like Alex said, you kind of just wasted some time. Maybe you fell in love with them and their work and then you can't afford it. Like it's definitely something you want to start out with.
I think the only time that gets hard is when a company doesn't really know what they should be offering because they just.
Then you can let the freelancer start the conversation. But if you know for sure you have a budget and you know you can't budge from that budget, I would start with that.
Yeah.
That actually is an interesting point, Carissa, in terms of like the information gathering you can get from the first couple conversations. If you were like, I don't know, totally clueless about content, which, you know, you should probably do a little bit of homework before you start hiring a bunch of writers. But if you're like, I have no idea what people charge, and you thought it was like $100 for an article, and everybody's like 800, 900, you're like, oh shit, we should probably go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Maybe go back to the boss and get more budget or something like that.
Right.
So it could be a learning experience too. Another thing I thought is like, what if, like, what do you think about putting your budget on the job ad or like on the initial email or something like that? Like saying, here's how much we want to pay.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
I wish job listings would do that.
I know, really.
Honestly, it's like, I mean, money is already a weird enough thing to talk about when you're over the phone or on the camera for some people. So I think it should just be put out there. I mean, I didn't put that in my job ad for Omniscient, but I started every conversation with that. Like, hey, here's our budget per piece. Like, what's your rate? Like, can we talk about it? And knowing you would work with us for a while, like, would you be willing to meet that? Some people countered. I mean, we ended up a little bit higher than what I thought, but I think it's worth like adding it to the beginning of a conversation.
I'm sure they appreciate
or the job ad itself.
I think it's probably better if you have a very clear idea in your head. The reason people don't is because they have a band of pay in their heads, whether that's like an HR department at a company or a company hiring freelance writers, and they want the person to accept less than the top of that band.
Yeah,
like, that's the whole game there. So, and especially if the quality is the same or something. So I think that's probably the justification.
Yeah.
Right. All right. And then the last step of this process, hiring and onboarding your writers. So going ahead and extending that offer. I mean, we kind of talked about that. Anything else with that point?
I always do a test article. I pay for it. But I always test about if I'm going to hire one or two, hopefully for the long term, then I'm going to test 10. And, you know, that's maybe not that same multiplication all the time. Like if I'm going to hire 5, I'm probably not going to test 50, but I'll probably test like 15, you know, like I'm always going to test many more than I hire essentially.
Well, when I was hiring for our blog, I think I got like 80 applicants. Wow. And I talked with 20, tested 8, hired 1.
Wow.
I did paid. No, I tested like 6 or something, but I did all paid pieces because then they were our content. That was our content to keep. Mm-hmm. And they were all great. It really came down to affordability and just the way that I liked how this person wrote. But yeah, paid test pieces for sure. I don't think people should do free test pieces, especially if they like keep the content after. I think that's kind of skeezy.
Yeah, I think it's unethical. And also, like you were saying, you want to keep the content preferably. You can edit it and make it into something worthwhile, even if it's not like the highest quality that you were expecting.
Yeah.
So the test assignment's cool. You can learn a lot, but the end goal, I think, in my opinion, is to work with as few writers as you need. So essentially, like if you can get by with one or two, that's what you should do. Because the more you have to deal with, one, it's a bunch of paperwork. So just getting people in, contractors and taxes and 1099s and all that stuff. It's more to manage. It's just a complex thing to like have to think about, like, oh, like Steve's writing this and Sarah's writing this, and like it's just more on your head versus like one or two, a handful of people with all those assignments. And then also the fewer writers, the more they build up compound knowledge, the more they know who to link to, who not to link to, what competitors to avoid mentioning, what topics to like, call back on. They start to build up that knowledge in the same way that an employee would. So you actually want to like build for the long term.
Yeah, definitely.
On the learning part, I'm already going through this with my personal site, but Allie, you probably noticed this, like some who come in with like a good recommendation, or, they seem really awesome from the job ad, you'll like give them a test assignment and then they like, ghost you, or like, hand it in 2 weeks late, and you're like, oh, okay, I got you. And then like somebody else you didn't expect at all will like hand in like a perfect draft, like a day early, and you're like, holy shit, let's go with this one. So there's things you can't learn until you actually like, you have skin in the game and you're actually working with them. And that test phase is a really good time to learn all that stuff.
I would say even if someone has an extensive portfolio, it's still helpful to see them in action. Because working with a freelancer is more than just a final draft. Like you onboard them, you chat with them, you edit them, So I think, like Alex said, I mean, you could find someone awesome that has some great bylines and they're always late, or, they don't follow instructions or whatever. They
don't take feedback well or something like that.
Yeah. How they got published on those sites, maybe like, I don't know, but all that matters is if they can produce for you. And I think seeing that in action as it applies to your relationship is really important.
That's a huge point. Actually, I want to, touch on is how they got published on those sites. So a good portfolio actually, I mean, sometimes it's trustworthy, but you have to realize like some of these sites have teams of editors and it goes through multiple rounds of revisions. And in some cases, I've dealt with this before. I'm not going to name names, but in my past with writers who essentially wrote a piece, and the piece that made it on the web was completely different, and it was completely rewritten by the editor, but they still put it in their portfolio and it's still their byline, and they still got paid for it, right? So it is really hard to parse that out. I would say that's probably the rare case. That's probably not the common. It does happen though. So
could you maybe in that case ask for the Google Doc along with the published version?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, ideally, or the revision history or something. Yeah, I would say like you're going to learn that during the test case. Like they won't be able to fake it then. So
good point. So for anyone who's listening, you can refer back to these 6 steps we just talked about in Allie's blog, which is on our website, beomniscient.com. Anything else you guys want to add that maybe we didn't touch on? Finding, vetting, hiring freelancers process?
No. I mean, the last thing is like, even if someone you tested, like of the 7 people that I tested and I chose one, like the other 6 were still great. I kept them in my little Notion document. And I said this earlier, but over time, this process can get easier as you kind of build up your network and build up your little like Rolodex of people that you know. And if hiring freelance writers is something you plan to do for your company or your personal site or just down the line, like it's always helpful to kind of keep that information handy and keep up that like network of folks. And then over time, you won't even have to like ask for referrals because you'll have a great list of people.
Yeah.
That's actually a really great point, building up the Rolodex of writers. Because you may actually find that like in a future project or future company, a person that you passed on for this project actually works out well for the next one. Or like some other companies asking for writer recommendations, and you've got a handful and you can send those over. Yeah. And that's a really cool value add too. So can we do a call to action, like have people sign up for our Omniscient certified writers database?
Yeah, we actually started our own of some of our, I don't want to say favorite, but folks we've worked with personally. We can vet we vetted them and we can vouch for them personally. Oh, hi, Biscuit.
Up on my lap.
Can't see this. Alex's dog is.
He's like staring at you. So we have a Airtable. We update it pretty regularly with new folks as we find them and meet them. But it's accessible on our website under the resources page. Let me double check if that's right. Yep. Under resources and guides and templates. Great starting point. Bunch of different price points, bunch of different niches. So yeah, check it out.
Cool. Check it out. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for taking the time. And thanks for making an appearance, Biscuit.
I've been on calls all afternoon, so he's been real attention starved.